Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you all very much for coming. Given that it's Laguna, that was probably somebody ran a stop sign. And so they're bringing out SWAT. We have a number of metrics we use to judge the success of the temple in general and also the success. Let's get that door closed. Thank you. And also of a given festival. And so one of the metrics we use is just donations that come in. And already this is, I think, about 50% more than our biggest festival ever on record in the 25 years I've been here. And our festivals in the last 25 years have been the most lucrative financially in the history of the temple, in the 50-plus year history of the temple, 54-year history of the temple. And so for sure this was the most successful festival we've ever had by about 50% from a financial perspective. So give yourselves a round of applause. You guys gave the money. Then we got a bunch of other things we do to figure out what's happening. We look at people who come in the door, amount of books that we distribute, how the bake sale does, and by all those accounts, this is our most successful festival ever. So sort of by every metric that we have, we also make outfits for the deities. This one was made in-house. It maybe took, 400 hours to make. And so it was when we saw it today. Normally we make extensive, we see it and then we have to go back and fix it right on the spot to make it nicer. But this time around we saw it and it was perfect. And I think it's the nicest outfit we ever made. That's a little bit more of a subjective opinion. But I think that was amongst the pujaris who were feeling like that. So we made a new outfit, raised a bunch of money, distributed a ton of books, had about 1,000 people come in the door. It was by every metric possible. It was a grand, smashing success. And now we're into the final countdown. If you've made it this far, I'm doubting that you're going to leave. And so this is the most serious devotees. Just let them know. Just shush them all. They just want to. You invite them in? That's good. Thank you for coming in. You were making such a disturbance outside. Now we've captured you. If you're here, then you're devoted. Some people come at some people are just late nighters, and so they show up in the 11th hour. We'll give you credit, but I think for a lot of you, you've been here for the whole festival, and you stick around, and you make it till 12 o'clock, till midnight, and it's an austerity. And so you, most probably, most of you are the most devoted, austere people this year because you're sticking around for the whole program. I think probably some of you are fasting as well. Raise your hand if you're fasting. Yes, it's just adds another layer. Just staying up late is one layer. Staying up late and fasting is another layer. Who's fasting even from water and not even drinking water? That's another layer of pain that you can add to the equation. And so it's a big deal. You get up early, you do service all day, you cook and you clean, you fast. Sometimes you even fast from water. You stay up late, attend the festival, help put it on, help participate. We had a huge shuttle service thing going on where we were driving people back and forth. That was a nice thing that we did this year. Anyway, that's just a little recap. And I was thinking about what a special day today is. And that traditionally we tell the story of Krishna's birth. It's something that's standardly done, has been done for thousands of years on Krishnashtami, on Krishna's birthday. I think as a precursor to appreciate Krishna's Janma Leela, or the story of Krishna's birth, a sacred narration of Krishna's birth, I think just like a boilerplate introductory bare minimum qualification is that you have to appreciate that Krishna is possessed of omnipotence. Krishna has avichintya shakti. Krishna is omnipotent, is all-powerful, is almighty. And it's a pretty standard definition of God, that God is both all good and all-powerful. And devotees, once they decide that they believe in divinity, once they find reason to believe in God, they start to think about, well, what's the nature of God? And then universally, these two qualities stand out: omnipotent and omnibenevolent, all good and all powerful. And then what happens is you think about what that means. What does it mean to be all good and all powerful? And inevitably, that means that God appears in this world. Because if God was all powerful, then he could accompany us to this world. And if God was all good, he would want to. And in fact, we have this idea that God's in your heart. It's there in most religions. It's called the Holy Spirit in Christianity. But this idea that God is within you, in your heart, accompanying you, watching you. It goes all the way back to the two birds of the Upanishads, one of which sits patiently, and the other bird which eats the fruits. And the one bird is the witness, and the other bird is the enjoyer. And that enjoyer of the fruits also suffers, but there's a passive bird that just sits there quietly as a witness. This goes all the way back to the Kathopanishad, one of the oldest Vedic texts. So this idea that God, through his omnipotence and through his omnibenevolence, accompanies us into the world it's a natural consequence of meditating on God's all goodness and all power. And in fact, you find it in most of the major religions of the world. At least the ones that bother to think it through. And then usually, God will miraculously appear at important junctures in the journey of the planet. And so, as living entities populate this world and are evolving and going through trials and tribulations, Krishna then appears at various junctures, miraculously. And of course, if God is all-powerful, he could appear, and if he's all good, he would want to. And our tradition, our Vaishnava tradition, the tradition of the Gita and the Bhagavat, has an interesting take on God's appearance in this world. We say that God never appears because of anything other than one thing. There's only one thing that can make God appear in this world. Mostly people think God appears in this world when there's some great tribulation. But that wouldn't require God's presence, because being omnipotent, God could just snap his fingers and right the wrong or fix the situation. So bad things would never be enough to make God personally appear in this world, because just through, if you think about what it means for God to be all-powerful, it means that Krishna has what's called sarva sankalpa shakti, or that simply desiring something makes it a fact. If you are omnipotent, then just if you desired something, that would become factual. Krishna's desire for something to be is tantamount to that thing coming into existence. And so if somebody was suffering unnecessarily, or Krishna had to save somebody, that could be accomplished automatically. So our tradition says that Krishna never appears to mitigate suffering. Krishna rather only appears to please and nourish the devotees, for whom nothing other than God's direct presence will satisfy them. Devotees are those people for whom nothing other than God's personal appearance will satisfy them. Because could Krishna snap his fingers and make someone satisfied who will only be satisfied by their personal presence? The answer would be no. And so devotees, because they require Krishna's personal presence in order for them to be happy, then Krishna's power is not enough. Rather, Krishna has to personally show up. Like Hanuman could have saved Sita Devi, but Sita Devi refused to be saved by Hanuman. Rather, she said, I'll wait for Ram to come and personally save me. And it gets into an interesting little conundrum, because if God's all-powerful, he can do anything. But if God's given us free will and we choose, I love you so much, I'll only be happy if you show up personally, then at that point, you're no longer all-powerful in the sense that you control my desires, and my desires are my own. And now to satisfy me, you have to personally appear. And in fact, this is just what devotees who follow the path of bhakti do. They fall in love with Krishna, and they decide that nothing other than Krishna's personal presence will suffice, which then obliges the Supreme Being to personally appear. So Krishna can right the wrong of the worlds just by deciding it should be so. Krishna can do anything. The one thing Krishna can't do is satisfy those people that love him, and love him so much that nothing else but seeing him personally will satisfy them. And then Krishna appears, and he appears in essentially two forms. And in fact, surprisingly, there are two stories of Krishna's birth. And we're going to go over both of them. In one form, Krishna appears powerfully as a parental figure, as the Supreme Lord, as the provider of everything you've ever wanted, as Krishna, the all-attractive one, the one who is the prime entity, the source of everything that exists, your savior, your creator. And we would call that the classical conception of God. Krishna appears as the classical conception of God. And most religions of the world, that's the one form of divinity that appears. That classical conception. So God's big, powerful. When you see him, you fall down on the ground. You offer prayers. You falter. Maybe you offer prayers again and again. Over and over. Arjuna says, I bow down to you again and again and yet again. From the front, from the back, from all sides, at all times. 1,000 times and yet again and yet again. Let's shut that door properly and not have anyone else come in through it. Whoa. Okay. No more coming and going from that door. Practically speaking, that is the singular form of divinity that appears in every religion. God is huge and powerful and munificent and fatherly or motherly. And you fall down at his feet and you ask for blessings and you supplicate and you genuflect and the Lord blesses you. And that's one of the Leelas of Krishna's appearance. In fact, we'll just tell that story now. Vasudeva and Devaki were two great devotees who had always prayed for many, many lifetimes that the Lord would appear as their child. And in fact, he did. He appeared in the previous yugas as their child. And every yuga, every million or so years, they would take birth in this world and Krishna would appear as their child. Somehow they had this desire. And in this particular incarnation, Vasudeva and Devaki suffered tremendously. They were imprisoned. Several of their previous children had been killed mercilessly by a despotic tyrant named Krsna. And in fact, Devaki was pregnant and imprisoned. And they were both very fearful that they would have a child and that child would be killed like several of their previous children had been killed. And in this incredibly tumultuous situation, where they'd done everything in their power to free themselves from their imprisonment and save their previous children, but to no avail. They were helpless. Krsna, wielded almost total control over their lives. A calm came over them, and the planet became much more peaceful. And everywhere you would look, in every direction, things became pleasant. And trees bore fruit, and low-class people became diminished. And piety began to reign supreme. And the Brahmanas' fires burned steadily from their yagnas. And the trees bore fruit, and the earth was bountiful. And the stars in the sky were twinkling. And the moon was very, very sharing its very nourishing rays. And a calm came over the world. And then the Supreme Lord appeared in front of Vasudeva and Devaki in a miraculous way. Not being born from her womb, but just appearing in front of them. And the Lord had 4 arms, indicating his superhuman qualities. And he had the Kaustuba money on his chest and the Vaijayanti garland that he was wearing. And he was floating in front of them with, just sun-like rays of mercy pouring off of him. They became practically blinded by this, and they faltered, offered obeisances, and offered prayers to the Supreme Lord. And although he appeared as if he was their son, it was a divine appearance of the Supreme Lord, not much different than how the Lord had appeared to Dhruv or Prahlad or so many other devotees. And they were aware, I'm in the presence of the Supreme Lord. And they offered prayers, and Krishna reciprocated with them, and he told them, you've worshipped me for many lifetimes, I've taken birth, you've been my parents for many lifetimes, and I'm here yet again, everything's going to be okay. And he inspired them. Yeah, please. Shri Krishna Jamashtami ki, Shri Shri Pancha Tattva ki, Shri Shri Radha Govinda ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra ki, Giridhaj Mahadaj ki, Gaur Premanand. And you can picture this. It's not so difficult to imagine. We know it, at least from television, you know what prisons look like. I'm assuming that most of you haven't been to prison. Maybe there's 1 or 2 people in this room who have been to prison. But for most of you, you've seen it on TV or something. Maybe you drove by it when you were driving through Chino or something like that. You drove past a prison. You could imagine being in prison, being pregnant, or being with your wife who was pregnant, being afraid that if you had a child, your child was going to be taken away from you and killed. You can imagine living in that kind of fear, praying to Krishna to protect you. And then it might be a bit of a stretch, but at least if the Lord's omnipotent, he could appear in front of you. You could have decided getting out of prison isn't enough. I want to see you, my Lord. You could make that prayer. And Krishna could appear in front of you in his full opulence and beauty and power, and you would be stunned. By his grace, you may offer some prayers, and he would tell you, you've been sojourning through this material world for so long. I've never forgotten you. I'm here for you even now. I never abandoned you. We have an eternal connection. Such a meditation is difficult, but it's not impossible. You could imagine such a thing. And in fact, that's what happened to Vasudeva and Devaki. And then Krishna shrunk down to the form of a small child. And had demonstrated his bhagavatva, his divinity, and then his haritva, his divinity, and then he shrunk himself down to a form that of a child. This isn't exactly like the baby Jesus phenomenon, because the baby Jesus phenomenon isn't really gone into in significant detail in the Christian tradition. And there also was not an awareness of what was going to happen in the future. And there also, even within Christianity, isn't this idea that Jesus himself is necessarily by himself the omnipotent Supreme Lord. There's still a father and a son, and there's some division of labor that takes place. But there is a little bit, called a little bit of an homage within the baby Jesus story in the manger that you find within Christianity. Anyway, that's story number one. That's story number one. And then we have Krishna's birth story number two. And this is where our tradition has something really unique to offer to the world. This is where our tradition is not like a typical religion. We have this extra manifestation of divinity that's really different than anything else on offer in the world of religion. It's dramatically different, and it's where our tradition really comes into its own. And that is that within those people who love God and will only be satisfied by Krishna appearing personally, within that category, there's two divisions. There's the ones who understand that God is the creator, the supreme Lord, and I need him to personally appear before me so I can get his mercy or her mercy directly. Nothing else will satisfy. But then there's this other group within that group. So again, within the group of I will only be satisfied by Krishna personally appearing before me, by the Lord appearing before me, by my Creator appearing before me. If he snaps his fingers and takes all my problems away, that's not going to satisfy me. If he snaps his fingers and gives me untold wealth, that's not going to satisfy me. Fame, knowledge, strength, nothing the Lord can give me and order for me and deploy, none of that's going to satisfy me. I need to see Krishna. But most of those people want to see the Supreme Lord and get that blessing from the Almighty Supreme. But there's this other group. And this other group loves Krishna limitlessly and intimately. And the funny thing about intimacy is that power differences don't work in an intimate setting. Hegemonies don't work for intimacy. If you are unlimitedly more powerful, or even significantly more powerful than the person you're dealing with, that differentiation creates distance between two people. You don't speak the same language. You're not cut from the same cloth. You don't have the same level of education. This was a problem for Drupad and Drona in the Mahabharata. Drona got snubbed because he wasn't rich like Drupad. In many ways, the whole Mahabharata war kind of half stemmed from this. It was one of the subplots of the Mahabharata war. And so, this happens all the time. If you are a king and your subjects, you could kill them or imprison them at any moment. They never just hang out with you and spend time because they're always aware that you could blink and ruin their life. And fear and intimidation and the even just awe pervades the relationship. Think about when you go in front of a judge in a courtroom, if you've ever been to a courtroom, and you go in front of a judge. There's no casualness. Or think about when a police officer pulls you over for speeding. I was just sitting out here the other day, and a police officer pulled over some young girl, and then I wasn't, I was kind of half watching. I was talking to somebody. We were all kind of half watching. And then they ordered her out of the car. then they ordered her to walk in a straight line. Then they ordered her to take a breathalyzer. Then they put her in handcuffs. And then they put her in the car and went away. And I watched the girl's face. She went from, I'm going to get out of this, to I might not get out of this, to I haven't gotten out of this, to this is the worst day of my life. Because the police officers have power over you. They have guns. Can I deal with that for me? So, it's hard for me to speak with noise because I've been fasting from food and water all day. And so I'm just, just keeping it together. It takes all of my power to just stay focused on what we're talking about. I always tell myself, I'm just going to drink some nimbu pani and I'll be okay, and then it'll be fine. But then I'm always thinking, I'll just wait an extra hour, and then at some point I'm like, I'm almost there, I'll just make it. But then I'm just barely functional. It's impossible to have a significant hegemony between you and another person and still have intimacy, because intimacy depends on equality, and intimacy requires freedom from fear, and power means there's always a sense in which you're aware that this other person is above you. This is why, where's that coming from? Whose kid is that? Oh, is it you? Just do your best. You got to work a little harder. Just kind of move your arms and stuff, and there you go. As long as you're doing that, you're good. As long as you're doing that much work. But you weren't doing that until just now when we embarrassed you. As long as you keep doing that, your kid can make all the noise and we won't make you leave. That's actually not true, but it'll work for a little while longer. So this group of devotees, they love Krishna, but they love Krishna with intimacy. And that intimacy makes them forget that Krishna's God. Their love overwhelms them, and they fall into a kind of divine delusion where they forget Krishna's God, and they love Krishna like their best friend, like their child, or like their lover. You're good. You're good. Stay there. Or their lover. That's our religion. People who love Krishna so much that they forget he's God, they fall into a divine illusion, which is called Yoga Maya, and they love Krishna like their best friend, like their child, or like their lover. Yashoda and Nanda are an example of this. There's like some sort of synergy going on here. Yashoda and Nanda are an example of loving Krishna like your child. Radharani and the gopis love Krishna like their lover. And Sri Dham and Madhu Mangal, Stoka Krishna, love Krishna as their friend. This is what makes the Bhagavat tradition special. And for this tradition, there's a whole other story of Krishna's birth. Krishna's parents. Are you raising your hand to ask a question? Not happening. I'm not going to take your question. Thank you. There's a whole other story of Krishna's birth. Let me tell you that story. Let's get that door closed, whoever's at the top. And you guys can just move forward just a little bit, and then you people at the top, come in. There's places to sit. Come in. Come in and sit down. Everybody move forward a little bit. And then you people at the top, come in. Don't stand. Come in and sit down. Also get off the stairs too, because you block people from being able to come in. Let's get that door closed, Rishabh. And let's leave that door open. Let's see if we can get a little air going. Let's leave that door open too. Okay. So to get back to where we were. 4 people who believe in God, they start to think about the nature of God. They come across 2 primary qualities, all good and all powerful. Those qualities mean that Krishna will appear in your life. For the most part, Krishna can appear in terms of his potency and just help you out in difficult times. It doesn't require his personal presence. Much like you can, call the electric company and tell them you're having a problem with your power, and it's not that the owner of the electric company has to personally come out, the CEO has to personally come out. He just sends somebody, or even they just do it from a board. It goes through the computer and problem solved. Most of us don't require Krishna's personal presence in our lives. We just want his power and his goodness so that we get out of tight spots and good things happen to us, because we're ultimately narcissistic and selfish, and we just want things for ourselves, and we want our life to be a little easier, and our religion is more or less about making our life easier, and we just have faith that there's a higher power, and so then we end up begging favors from them as well as from our bank and from our family and friends. But there's a small cadre of devotees in the world who they just want to see Krishna. They don't want to be saved by anybody else. They may need help, they may not, but only Krishna's personal appearance will work for them. And for most of those people, they want to see Krishna in this form of power and opulence. And so for 99%, maybe even 99.9% of the people in the world, that's the vision they have. It's the Supreme Lord descends from a cloud, from a flower airplane, blesses them. It's a Narasimha type situation. Or Vishnu, Narayan appearing before Dhruv Maharaj, something like that. A Vishvarup appearing in front of Arjun. And even within Hinduism, that's the case. But then within that group of people who just need to see Krishna personally, there's this small subset that's decided, I want to love Krishna intimately. And that desire for intimacy takes away the knowledge of God's divinity. They fall into a kind of divine delusion, and they have Krishna end up being like their child, like their lover, or like their friend. And that's really, in essence, what differentiates our particular sect of Krishna-worshipping Vaishnavas from the rest of the world of Vaishnavas that worship Vishnu or Narayan or Sitaram or Varaha. Really, it's kind of a north-south divide. If you go to South India, it's all this Narayan worship. But even in North India, it's mostly the form of Krishna, but they're thinking of Narayan. They worship the form of Krishna, but they're still praying for things and protection and stuff like that. But the form of Krishna is meant to create intimacy. That's why Krishna has 2 hands. That's why Krishna plays a flute instead of wields a chakra. He's just lovely. Like Cupid, you just fall in love with him. So for this group, there was a Yashomati, Yashoda Devi. Somehow she couldn't have a child. Her and her husband, Nanda Baba, they tried for so many years to have a child. They did the Dwadasi Brat, the Dwadasi Parama Brat for over a year. They took blessings from all the sadhus. Even Nanda Maharaj was so loved by his community of cowherds that even all of his friends, the other cowherds, they did austerities so Nanda Maharaj could have a child. Think about what great friends they are. They were themselves performing austerities so that Nanda Maharaj could have a child. Not so they could have a child, but so that their friend could have a child. And Yashoda was so sad. She was just morose. And Nanda was saying, he would say to her, it's okay, Devi. If Providence does not want us to have a child, we won't have a child. It's up to the Supreme. You don't worry. You've been good. Everything's good. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay. He was feeling like such a sadhu, such a magnanimous soul. This Brahmacharini came, this Tapasvini came. She gave blessing to Yashoda Devi. She had her sit on her lap and said, I bless you that you'll have a child very soon. It was Purnamasi coming. Yogamaya personified. Yogamaya who only lives in Braj. The personification of the divine illusion that allows people to forget that Krishna is God. And that gave them great hope. Asha Bandha. They were filled with hope. They were bound to hope. Bandha is where you get the English word bind from. Asha means hope. So they were bound to hope. They had hope firmly established in their heart by the blessings of this very special Brahmacharini, and they had some feeling that we'll have a child soon. And then in due course, Yashoda became pregnant, and the whole community of cowherds in Nandagaon was just, I don't know what's happened here. I think we lost it off Facebook. It just is what it is. The whole community of cowherds was just in ecstasy. They were so happy. And then one night, again, it was auspicious. The moon was supposed to only be half a moon. Today's Ashtami, but the moon came full in the month of Bhadra. And Rohini Nakshatra was there. And it was a waning moon, but somehow the moon appeared full. And Krishna was born. And everybody was so calm and peaceful, Yashoda fell asleep for her birth. She wasn't even awake for her birth. Can somebody just go and ask them to maybe go outside? What is it? Okay. Somebody went? Okay. Sorry, guys. Like I said, I just barely hanging on. She fell asleep. And then Krishna was just there laying, and he began crying, and his crying sounded like Omkar. Like people chant, Om. Krishna's crying sounded like that. And all the gopis woke up, and they didn't even know they'd had a child. And they woke up to this beautiful, almost like, a baby chanting Om, it's a combination of like the Brahman is chanting Om and a child and the sweetness of the child's voice. And they woke up, and Yashoda looked at Krishna. And she looked at Krishna and just fell in love at her little child. Now Krishna had his hands are marked with like a chakra and an elephant stick. He has different auspicious symbols on his hands, conch shell. So he had his hands like this, so no one could see those signs. And there was no garland, and there was no kaustuba money. He had a Srivatsa, a little white line on Krishna's right side of his chest. He had a little gold line on the left side of his chest, which are classic symbols of Krishna and Vishnu. And Yashoda thought, that white line is some breast milk. And she kept trying to wipe it off. She thought it was some breast milk from her. In fact, the elderly gopi said, take him and feed him. And she picked up Krishna and she bathed him in her breast milk. Her breasts were overflowing with milk, and they were bathing Krishna in milk. And then Krishna suckled. The Supreme Lord drank the breast milk of his devotee. You can see the contrast. Devaki is offering prayers. Yashoda is suckling. Krishna's suckling from Yashoda. And even Yashoda was like, I don't know how to feed. I've never had a child. So the elder goes, you put him on your lap and you caress him, and then he'll latch. So they went through this latching ritual. And she saw that white line and she thought it was breast milk, and she tried to wipe it off. And she saw the golden line, and she thought for a moment, she just kind of spaced out, and she thought, some beautiful yellow birds have made a nest in a tamal tree. Tamal trees are very dark. Krishna is oftentimes called Tamal Krishna because he has a dark complexion like a tamal tree. Radharani is oftentimes likened to a champaka flower, to a kadamba flower. And so Krishna is Tamal Krishna. And she thought that a group of yellow birds had made a nest, and that's what was causing that line. Then she thought, no, I'm looking at a cloud, Mega Sham, a dark cloud, and there's lightning in the cloud. And that was that yellow streak. Then she thought, no, I'm looking at a gold testing stone. You go and buy gold in India. They have this black stone, and then you take the gold and you rub it. And if the gold is pure, a little bit will rub off on the stone. You have a gold streak on the stone. You must have bought gold like this before, right? Yeah, when you were a child, I bought gold like this before. And they show you the gold line on the stone. So she thought, it's like a gold testing stone. There's a line of gold. And she woke up. And she, oh no, this is my son. Then he had curly hair. A half head of hair, beautiful black locks of hair. Krishna's name is Keshava, means somebody with beautiful hair. And so, Kesha means hair. And so, then she became intoxicated again, and she thought, there's like a swarm of black bumblebees, like around Krishna. His hair was so beautiful and curly, and it's like so much depth to it. It like almost came to life, and she thought it was a swarm of black bumblebees around Krishna's hair. And she thought, no, it's like the dark night surrounding Krishna, because it was so black. You see, so black and so dark. Then she looked at Krishna's face, and she could see her own reflection, because Krishna's like so beautiful and almost transparent. So she saw her own reflection in Krishna's naturally glowing face, and she thought, oh, some witch has dressed up like me and is coming to steal my son. And then she said, Narasimha, Narasimha, because she became filled with fear that somebody might hurt her child. She loved Krishna so intensely. Not only did she forget he was God, she actually became afraid for the safety of her child. And then she started reflecting, and she started feeling like Krishna looked like a cluster of blue lotuses growing out of the ocean. Like that she was the ocean, and Krishna was like a cluster of blue lotuses that came from her. Then she saw, no, Krishna's face looks like liquefied sapphires. Then she thought that his cheeks looked like sapphire bubbles in the Yamuna River, because they were kind of glowing, and so like they came out like almost like your cheeks have that like extra sort of tint to them, and they almost look like bubbles in some way. Then she thought, no, his lips look like bimba fruit. No, they look like java flowers. No, they look like banduka flowers. And his chin looks like rose apple. And his eyes look like blue lotuses. And she started to look at Krishna and think he was just made up of flowers. Then she thought, no, he looks like a big lump of musk. Then she thought, but no, he's soft like butter. No, even more like sea foam. And he looks like he's made out of sea foam tinged with musk. And she became afraid of even touching her son, because he was so soft, She thought the touch of her body might hurt him, just like the gopis had the same feeling, that the touch of their limbs, they were afraid to put Krishna's feet on their breasts because they were afraid that Krishna's feet might become hurt by their breasts, which would be too hard. And so as the people who love Krishna romantically meditated on holding Krishna's feet to their breasts, they were afraid that they might hurt Krishna's soft feet with their hard breasts. Yashoda had a feeling like that about even touching her own son. And in this way, she just was mesmerized by Krishna's beauty, and she was filled with maternal feelings, and she lactated, and she just fell hopelessly in love with the Supreme Being who for her was her child. And then Nanda Maharaj came in, and he came in to do the Jata Karma ceremony, the cutting of the umbilical cord, and he was just so happy. He just kept looking at his son, and when people were looking at Nanda Maharaj, looking at his son, it looked like he was a statue because he was so stunned in ecstasy. And but his face was so bright, it looked like good fortune personified had embraced him. And he began giving charity. And when Nanda Maharaj gave charity, Lakshmi Devi, who normally holds a cluster of lotuses, she was only holding one lotus. And Surabhi cows could no longer give blessings, and desire trees could no longer give unlimited fruits, and touchstones could no longer give make gold, because Nanda Maharaj, all the charity in the world was flowing through Nanda Maharaj. And he gave cows in charity to all the brahmanas, and he blessed everybody. He was so happy and joyous. He looked like a painting to the devotees who were watching him, because he was just so stunned looking at the beauty of his son. He was crying, and his tears mixed with his beard. And I gave this kind of like salt and pepper, kind of almost cloud-like effect to his face. And then all the gopis and everybody came down from heaven, and they were watching this miracle as Krishna took birth, but they didn't even know he was God. They just fell in love with him according to their unique relationship. And they began having a food fight. And there was yogurt and milk flowing through the streets of Nandagaon, of Gokula, and they were throwing balls of paneer at each other. And those balls of paneer, they looked like solidified moonbeams. Or even some people thought that they must have gone to the shore of the Milk Ocean, and they must have taken the mud from the Milk Ocean and made balls out of that mud because they were so white. And everybody was happy and joyous that their best friend, that their long-lost lover, that their friend, philosopher, and guide, that the person they love more than anything else in the world had appeared in their midst. And so we have two stories of Krishna's birth. We have Devaki and Vasudeva and their child, who's known as Vasudeva Krishna, who appeared as the Supreme Lord. And then we have Nanda Baba and Yashoda Mai in Gokula. And Krishna took birth from Yashoda, and they were just filled with love. Our tradition obviously favors the latter understanding. And so even when we encounter the former understanding, we look at those accounts carefully. We find in the Bhagavad Krishna is called Pashupa Angajaya. He is the born of the limbs of the cowherd Nanda. And we say this is the proof that he came from Nanda. And we say, and the Bhagavatam also says, Jamana Braja, that Krishna was born in Vrindavan. And even Yogamaya is known as Anuja Vishnu. She's known as the younger sister of Vishnu. And so all of these evidences are given in our sacred texts that prove to our devotees beyond a shadow of a doubt that in fact Krishna was born of Yashoda and Nanda. And what happened was, when Vasudeva Krishna was taken out of the jail because they wanted to protect their son, they became a little fearful, Devaki and Vasudeva. And so then magically all the locks came off the doors, all the guards fell asleep, and Vasudeva took that baby, inspired from within his heart. He took that baby out of the jail. He got to the bank of the Jamuna, and the Jamuna parted. It was very heavy. It had been raining. The rain stopped raining heavily. It was raining very softly. But even then, Ananta Shesh, the divine serpent, became an umbrella over Vasudeva and Krishna. You see that sometimes in pictures of Krishna. So even one drop of water wouldn't fall on Krishna. And he crossed the river, and he got to Gokula, where Krishna had taken birth. And then when he gave the child to Yashoda, who was asleep, that child, Vasudeva Krishna, merged into Gokula Krishna, Brajendra Nandan Krishna. Because, and here's the last point I'll leave you with, it is not possible to get blood from a stone. Similarly, it is not possible to get intimate love from a formal relationship with God. If you cultivate a formal relationship with divinity, you will never get intimate love, just as much as you don't get blood from a stone. However, when Krishna is bewitchingly beautiful and enchantingly beautiful and seductively beautiful, he's still the Supreme Lord. And therefore all of his power, even though it's hidden, is still within him. Therefore, the sweet form, two-armed, Brajendra Nandan Sri Krishna, playing a flute, being loved by the devotees in Braj, that form can include the derivative form of power, because that power has been subsumed by love or overpowered by love, but it didn't disappear. He's still the Supreme Lord. In contrast, the intimate love is not there in the more powerful form, and it cannot be born from it. And that's why Vasudeva Krishna merged into Brajendra Nandan Sri Krishna. And that's why you find in the Bhagavatam these cryptic statements that Krishna was born in Vrindavan, that Krishna is the son of a cowherd, that Yogamaya is Krishna's younger sister. And that's the resolution given in our tradition for how these two stories can be reconciled and seen together. Such things may not be important for most devotees, but for people who accept our sacred tradition, who love our sacred texts, who believe in them, who cultivate a relationship with leave that door open, who cultivate a relationship with a loving, intimate form of divinity, these reconciliations are the most important. Once you've gotten over the idea of does God exist, once you've gotten over the idea of is God a person, once you've gotten over the idea of what does it mean for God to be all good and all powerful, once you've gotten over the idea that I want to see God and I don't really want anything else in this life, once you've gotten over the idea that hegemonies don't work for me, I need to have an intimate relationship, then these beautiful narrations of Krishna's Leela, Yashoda and Nanda as Krishna's true parents, becomes really important to you. And then reconciling the various statements in Scripture becomes significant.